What is going on, YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the 15th album by Too Short. Basically, this album is called Married to the Game, and it came out in the fall of 2003. Now, this was an album that came out prior to a hit album by Too Short, which was called Blow the Whistle, which had a bunch of Lil Jon beats on there. I definitely recommend that album. It had some good hits on there. It was around the time when Too Short paired up with Khalees to do the song Bossy, and he kind of got like a second win for a while. It's an interesting vibe that he kind of had around that time, but I also kind of feel like this is an interesting album just because these were the initial pairings that Too Short had with Lil Jon. So he looked up Lil Jon back in the early 2000s, back when he was dropping like Kings of Crunk and getting ready to drop Crunk Juice and some of that type of stuff. And it's just interesting seeing some of these beats on here. This Too Short kind of meshes pretty well with like Atlanta and that sort of thing. There's two Atlanta producers on here. Lil Jon's on here a bunch, and then you get one Jazzy Faye beat, but then also a longtime collaborator, Ant Banks, is kind of on here, and then a producer called Dez, who I don't know about, is on here. So it's interesting just kind of seeing how Too Short was meshing with the 2000s, because he had been around for like 20 years. He had been around since like 1983, something like that. So he had been dropping albums for a while. He was there in the golden age of rap, and he was there back when the Beastie Boys and Run DMC and Ice-T and some of those type folks were dropping things. So it's definitely interesting to kind of get that scene as to how this album turned out, just to be able to mesh with these styles. But I kind of look after it like the thing with this album in particular is the fact that it's a decent album, but I think because Too Short's album catalog and hit catalog is so large, it's not as if he had to put out like a 10 out of 10 album. It's not to say that it's a poor album, but it's just kind of the concept that he's kind of like Snoop Dogg and Eminem and Jay-Z and folks like that who have 12, 13, 15, 16 albums to the point where they don't have to have every single song. Because I would probably have to say that Too Short probably has like more than 100, 200 songs that he can perform at his concerts as far as that kind of goes. It's just a lot to kind of get just to be able to have all these particular ones to kind of have them performed and such. But this one kind of seemed like a seldom album that's just not overtly kind of talked about. I feel like the single Shake That Monkey, when I think of Too Short songs, this is not one of the definitive Too Short songs to kind of bring up, and I just question if he performs it that oftenly anymore. It's not to say that he wouldn't, but it's just kind of one that I feel like there's certain songs by artists, like when you think of Eminem or something, as to whether or not he still performs like Ass Like That or one of those type songs. The same kind of fashion as far as that kind of goes, just being able to suppose if Too Short performs every one of his singles from every one of his hit albums. This is kind of one that seems more seldom as far as that kind of goes. But that's just kind of the thing about this project. It's definitely kind of a quieter project, but it is good. It does have some Lil Jon beats on here, but I do think this is kind of more Kings of Crunk era Lil Jon, or it just, I feel like that if you want like absolutely some of the best Lil Jon beats that he has done with Too Short, I would definitely recommend the Blow the Whistle album, because that one's just the more fashionable kind of one as far as that kind of goes. But this one does have some good gems on here. It's just a little bit in a different fashion, just kind of more like kind of more Bia and like I don't give a fuck era Lil Jon, that type of stuff as far as that kind of goes. But just to be able to say there's solid enough stuff on here. It's just kind of a quieter project for Too Short as far as that kind of goes. So we'll go ahead and talk about the singles. So the first single is Choosing, and this has Jazzy Faye and Jagged Edge on there. And this is a nice bubbling evening romp. I would say it's a late day commerce song, and it's definitely a comfy, kind of have a nice jig kind of bop. I would definitely kind of feel like this is just kind of one that's kind of after hours, just kind of 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 5:30 p.m. type stuff when the sun is setting, but still kind of maybe just car malaise, just hanging out near your car, that type of stuff. Just after hours, just got done with work, just kind of figuring out what to do. Not necessarily at work, but just kind of the after, just the opening minutes of just being done with your responsibilities and that type of stuff as far as trying to figure out what to do for the evening and night as far as that kind of goes. I don't feel like this is as much of like a Friday, Saturday night. I don't feel like this is as much of like a Friday night, Saturday night kind of tune as much as it is like a Tuesday evening, Wednesday evening, where you just kind of feel a little bit jivey, but not enough to really cut loose full blown as far as that kind of goes. Just an interesting single to kind of get. I like this concept of getting like a slight makeshift, but just kind of one just for having a good time or just getting ready to have a good time. The concept of just kind of musing and kind of figuring out what's going to happen across the next few days as far as that kind of goes. It's a good one to smoke a stogie to, something like that. Smoke a swisher, just have some good times, get some food going, some of that type of stuff as far as that kind of goes. It's a nice kind of late day commerce kind of cut, but still kind of recreational in like a sense where it's just not full blown, just square like where you just are not doing anything jovial or something like that. So it's just kind of one of those things. But Probably the single that was more likely to be heard off this album is the second single, Shake That Monkey, and that has Lil Jon and the East Side Boys on here. So this is kind of a crunk regular gem to marinate in a nightclub, I would say. Shake That Monkey is a crunk regular gem to marinate in a nightclub. It's got a hype Lil Jon chorus, but it's actually kind of relaxed. I like the concept of this particular beat. It's just more kind of lobby fodder as far as just being in like a nightclub, strip club, something like that. Just kind of more relaxing, just being out and about and bantering, that sort of stuff. Just kind of typical kind of vibes of just getting drinks and feeling good, just getting some drinks in your system and kind of schmoozing a little bit as far as that kind of goes. Just an interesting enough one. Or I do feel like the chorus pretty much has a pretty hype Lil Jon typical crunk type number of just getting buck and that sort of stuff. I kind of look after this is actually a more relaxed and just kind of relatively not necessarily plain, but just kind of more sedate almost kind of feeling minus the chorus. I just think it's kind of a affable kind of single that goes along with this. It's a good one to kind of hear out and about. It's just it reminds me of something. There weren't really like a ton of Dirty South rap songs kind of like this. This is kind of something that Ludacris would have done or someone like that that's kind of similar to Ludacris around 2003, 2004, 2002, something like that. Because this is a little bit quieter than what Lil Jon would do, but it's also not quite as like soft as like what Kanye West would do, or folks that are more backpacker and that sort of concept. So it's just kind of like a vanilla club song that's just good for marinating in the club and kind of like lobby fodder as far as that kind of goes. Just the entry kind of stuff and the dap getting and that sort of concept as far as that kind of goes. Just a good single. So to talk about the songs I recommend on here, there's 7 songs I recommend on this album. 6 of them are regular songs. 1 is an almost song. So that's kind of the concept about it. So the 6 songs I recommend would be Choosin', Shake That Monkey, You Can't Fuck With Us, Burn Rubber, California Girls, and Hey Let's Go. And the Almost song is Get It. So to talk about Get It, the Almost song. Get It is a boppish dance and strip club beat, I would say. It's a vanilla outing, some vanilla outing fare beat-wise, and the beat is kind of pedestrian. I just would kind of feel like the beat on here is kind of pedestrian as far as that kind of goes. It's somewhat catchy, but it's just kind of middle of the road. It's just, I can see it getting grating compared to some of these better ones. I would definitely prefer like Hey Let's Go, Shake That Monkey, You Can't Fuck With Us, or Choosin'. Those are just some better, more affable ones for like a night out. But I do feel like Get It is kind of like a nice strip club kind of vanilla tune as far as that kind of goes. If you're not really paying attention to the music as much, you just kind of like it as white noise and background music, it kind of works as far as that kind of goes. But it's just kind of more grating to kind of really get turned up to when you're paying attention to like the lyrics and that type of stuff. It's kind of middle of the road, but it's just kind of one I like it enough to recommend, but it can possibly get somewhat grating compared to some of the better productions on here. So that's kind of the thing. But a song that definitely reminds me of Lil Jon is Hey Let's Go, which has Cuddy Cartel and Devin the Dude on there. This is a creeping, sleek, kind of crunk jive of a beat, I would say. It's a decent dance song, and it's a stock social cut, I would say, and it's very catchy. So this is just one that kind of feel there was like a song that like Lil Jon did with like Jadakiss and Styles P. I don't remember the name of that song, but it has a pretty similar production to that one. Definitely feels like one of the more rowdier ones off of Kings of Crunks. Just a good kind of creeping kind of beat on there that just has a very creeping beat on there that works similar to the stuff Lil Jon would do. It's just not quite as noisy. The thing about Too Short pairing up with Lil Jon is he doesn't really do like the chair throwing, standing on the couches type vibes, but he does have like this pimpish kind of vibe about him where he kind of brings like it's kind of the same thing that T.I. kind of did. When you think of T.I. and Lil Jon, like T.I. wasn't getting crazy and throwing chairs and that sort of stuff in like the club as far as that kind of goes, breaking cups and that sort of concept. But I look after Too Short just has like a more kind of ambient kind of vibe as far as some of that kind of goes. It's just interesting kind of get some of these that they're leery and they work and they're rowdy in some senses, but they make you dance in a lot of ways, but they're not quite, just it has a different approach as far as the lyrics kind of go. And I like that concept as far as getting it. But the beat, if you're just listening to the productions, it is a pretty crunk-like tune, but really Too Short and folks like Too Short and T.I. just have a different approach towards it. So that's kind of the thing. A surprising cut on here that I like that's really not crunk at all, but I do like the concept of it is California Girls. This is an out and about kind of evening gem for schmoozing, I would say, and it's got some mellow vibes. The mellow vibes are breezy and affable. I would definitely kind of say it's just a good one for just that sort of concept. It's just kind of one to kind of flirt with some women, that type of stuff, just kind of be out and about in the evening, just kind of out on the town, some of those type moments as far as just cruising around and just having some evening senses of just being near a beach or being near like just kind of being more out on the town and in the wind and that type of stuff, being near beaches and bars and that sort of thing, and just kind of more mingling mode. And as far as that kind of goes, just a good concept of that. I do like that one. So it's a surprising kind of mood. It's a surprising kind of mood for Too Short, just because the ambience of the beat is not typical for the fashion that he kind of does. But I do like these kind of melodic, kind of ambient ones as far as this schmoozing. And then Burn Rubber is probably one of the most popular songs on the album when it came to Spotify plays. This is a nice one. This is kind of a skeletal club hopper, I would say. It's a woozy kind of get cranked dance rumbler, I would say, and it's an easy radio gem for after hours. So this is just kind of one. This is another strip club bop similar to Get It and Shake That Monkey, but it's just kind of the concept of this one just feels a little bit more rowdy and ready to go. But it's just kind of a minimalist kind of beat. I do like the concept on here. It's definitely one to get cranked to, probably one of the songs to get the most turned up to on the album. But it just kind of has such a skeletal kind of beat on here. And then one of the best beats on this album is You Can't Fuck With Us, which has Nori and Petey Pablo on here. This is a crunchy nightclub hit. It's loud, ferocious, has a loud, ferocious pace, and it's got good dance vibes and a real craze kind of feel. This one just kind of feels like something ripped out of like the early 2000s. It's kind of an easy kind of highlight for one. This is definitely a pretty crunk number. This was produced by Lil Jon, so this is another nice one. And this kind of has like, yeah, basically just a real rowdy kind of energy. This is definitely one that's probably one of the more, this is definitely probably one of the more noisier ones that when I talked about how Too Short doesn't typically get that rowdy in his lyrics, this is definitely one that kind of does that more and just kind of feels more like a craze kind of one compared to some of the stuff that Lil Jon does. Petey Pablo works on this song pretty well, and Nori kind of was a surprising one on here, but he works on this song also. So it's just kind of a good, it's just kind of a good vibe to kind of get that. But talk about the 8 songs out of 15 I didn't enjoy, particularly songs 8 through 15 minus the song Get It and California Girls. Just felt like a lot more of limp songs and kind of more in a hardcore sense that just didn't pull off the catchy vibes quite as well. I just felt like a lot of these just didn't quite have the edge that they needed to, especially compared to songs like Shake That Monkey or Choosing, some of the singles, or Burn Rubber even, or Hey Let's Go. I just felt like Lil Jon just felt like a lot more affable a producer around these times, and I like that Too Short at least had some of his old vibes for some of his old fans, but it just didn't translate well. I mean, I feel like going back to like 1987 or 1994 should have worked, but I just would have expected more in the production field as far as trying to get to that. And then I was also kind of disappointed in the Aunt Banks beat, What's She Gonna Do? That just felt like ripped out of 1992 or something, and it just was not quite as edgy as it needed to be. So really, I mean, I feel like Too Short translates pretty well to like 2003 and the early 2000s fair when he did some of these beats that had a little bit more jive and kind of dance vibes about them as far as that kind of went. But some of these that were trying to bring back like Too Short from 1988, 1991 just didn't quite have the catchiness that they needed to. Like, I feel like California Girls worked and Get It kind of halfway worked, but the rest of these just kind of felt like this kind of pedestrian kind of Too Short songs that just didn't really jump off the page. So that's kind of the thing. But so me liking 6 out of 15 songs plus one almost song, I'm going to go ahead and give this album 6 out of 15. I'm going to go ahead and give this album like a 4.5 out of 10. I feel like I would give it a higher score, but it's just kind of the concept that 7 out of 15 is really not even half the album. So I kind of feel like it has to be less than the halfway score. I kind of look after, there are some good gems on here, but it's just kind of middle of the road. There are some good gems on here, but it's just kind of a little bit mediocre in terms of the process that kind of went along with it. There's enough gems on here to be able to have a good time and take your shirt off and really get crunk in that sort of moments. But I do feel like some of these are somewhat calmer. And then on top of that, it's just kind of the concept that there's just not enough of them. I kind of feel like maybe there needed to be another hit producer. I'm trying to think of someone else who could have been like Lil Jon that could have been on here, but it's just kind of the concept. Probably needed to be another cat on here, someone like David Banner, someone like that that could have been on here also, something in that sort of fold as far as that kind of went. But I look after it, like the social score though, I'm going to give like a 6.5 out of 10. I'm going to give the social score. Talk about the social score. I'm going to give the social score like a 6.5 out of 10, just because there are some gems on here where I do feel like 7 songs out of 15 have enough edge towards them, but I kind of look after it just in the sense that these are some good ones, and I do definitely think that Too Short is a great pairing with Lil Jon and Jazzy Faye and some of those type ones as far as that kind of is concerned. I just didn't like the concept of how half this album just didn't have like the energy that it probably needed to. I mean, I felt like it was probably vintage Too Short, but it just was not a good showing of vintage Too Short. So that's kind of the problem about it. But I look after it like there was some edge on here to be able to have some social vibes, and these are kind of seldom and quieter talked about Too Short songs that if you wonder how often they're kind of talked about. It just seems like it's more uncommon, especially 20 years after it'd been 20 years that Too Short's been in the game. So 20 years ago, Too Short, this was kind of his 20 years ago, this was kind of Too Short's second win as far as being back on the scene. And now 20 years after 2003, it's even more so now that he's been in the game for a full 4 decades. So that's kind of the thing about it. So I look after that as far as that's kind of concerned. So 6.5 out of 10 social. In terms of the future, like Too Short's been around. He has dropped more projects and he has probably like 15, 20 projects, something like that. I'm going to have to get to some more of these, but this is a pretty decently enough project. But I just would have to say it's a quieter one. It's kind of a seldom one and it's kind of somewhat mediocre, but there are some gems on here that you don't want to ignore. And it's probably worth a good purchase to get to some of these kind of early Lil Jon and Crunk type numbers and such.